I walked into my son's backyard expecting to hear my grandchildren laughing. Instead, I heard something that made my legs go weak. Why is she even still alive? For a second, I honestly thought I was dying. Because no one should ever hear those words said about them, especially not by their own child. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't walk away. I stayed. And what I overheard next wasn't just cruel. It was a plan. A plan that explained everything. Distance. The coldness. The sudden impatience with my existence. They thought I was too old to notice. Too weak to understand. Too close to the end to matter. They were wrong. And by the time this day was over, they would realize they had underestimated the wrong woman. Backhand index pointing right. If you've ever felt unwanted by your own family, don't leave. This story is for you. Before we go any further, let me say this. If you believe family always means love, if you believe parents are always respected in old age, then this story might change how you see everything. And if stories about family betrayal, quiet revenge, and unexpected strength mean something to you, take a second to like, comment, and subscribe. Not for me. For every parent who was told without words that they had lived too long. I am not a dramatic person. I never have been. I'm the kind of woman who keeps things inside, who smiles when she's hurting, who doesn't complain because she doesn't want to be a burden. I raised my son mostly alone after his father died. There were nights I went to bed hungry so he could eat. Days I wore the same shoes for years so he could have new ones. Dreams I buried quietly so his could survive. And I never once reminded him of it. Because I thought love didn't need receipts. Standing there in his backyard, listening to my life being discussed like a mistake that should have ended already, I realized something painful. I hadn't just grown old. I had grown invisible. I stayed exactly where I was. My heart was racing, my mouth had gone dry, and my legs felt like they might give out at any second. Every sensible part of me said to leave, to quietly turn around, go back through the gate, and pretend this afternoon never happened. But another part of me, older, tired, and done with pretending, refused. So I leaned slightly closer to the fence, careful not to make a sound. They were sitting at the patio table. I could see them now through the leaves. My son had his phone in his hand, scrolling like the conversation wasn't even important. My daughter-in-law was sipping her drink, her tone irritated, bored. Like she was talking about a broken appliance. She's always around, she said. Always needing something. Always watching. It's exhausting. My son sighed. Long, familiar sigh. The kind he used to make as a teenager when he didn't get his way. She's old, he said. What do you expect? Well, the word hit harder than I expected. Not my mother. Not she's lonely. Just old. As if that explained everything. As if age erased history. As if it cancelled out the nights I stayed awake beside his bed when he was sick. The years I worked overtime so he could go to college. The way I held myself together after his father died so he wouldn't see me fall apart. My daughter-in-law shook her head. I just don't get why she keeps going. She has nothing. No life. No purpose. She just exists. There it was. The thing people don't usually say out loud. The belief that once you stop being useful, you stop deserving space. I felt my chest tighten not just with pain but with clarity. This wasn't about one bad comment. This was how they saw me. Shadow. Leftover. Something waiting to be removed. She could at least move somewhere smaller, my daughter-in-law continued. That house is wasted on her. We could really use it. My breath caught. My house. The one my husband and I bought together. The one filled with memories. The one I was still paying taxes on, still maintaining, still calling home. My son nodded slowly. Yeah. I've thought about that too. Thought about it. Like it was already his. I suddenly understood the impatience. The forced politeness. The way visits had become shorter. Calls less frequent. The subtle pressure disguised as concern. They weren't waiting for me to get better. They were waiting for me to be gone. And in that moment something shifted inside me. The pain didn't disappear. but it hardened into something else. Resolve. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that I had heard every word, and that I was done being quiet. As they kept talking, my mind drifted somewhere else, backward through years I hadn't thought about in a long time. I remembered the first house my husband and I lived in. Teeny, drafty. The kind of place where you could hear every neighbor cough through the walls. We were young then, tired but hopeful. We talked about the future like it was guaranteed. Then he got sick. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Slowly. Quietly. The kind of sickness that creeps in and settles itself deep, pretending it might leave one day if you're patient enough. I was the one who took him to appointments. The one who sat through explanations I barely understood. The one who learned how to be strong because there was no one else who could. And when he died, it was just me and our son standing at the graveside. I remember gripping my son's shoulder, telling him everything would be okay, even though I had no idea how that could possibly be true. From that day on I made a choice. Chose him. Every decision after that was built around keeping his life steady while mine quietly shrank. I didn't date again. I didn't travel. I didn't complain. I worked longer hours. I learned how to stretch groceries. I learned how to smile through exhaustion so he wouldn't feel guilty for dreaming big. And he did dream big. I was proud of that. Standing in his backyard now, listening to him talk about me like I was already half gone, I wondered when those memories stopped mattering. When sacrifice became invisible. When love turned into obligation, and then into irritation. "She's probably listening," my daughter-in-law said suddenly, glancing around. My heart nearly stopped, but my son laughed. "No, she never just shows up. She always calls first. She's predictable." Predictable. I almost smiled at that, because for the first time in a very long time, I was about to do something they didn't expect. "She's not sick enough to need help," my daughter-in-law continued. "But she's not young enough to enjoy life. She's just in the way." In the way. That was the phrase that settled it. I wasn't overhearing frustration anymore. I was listening to justification. The kind people use when they're trying to convince themselves they're not cruel. Just practical. I slowly stepped back, my shoes sinking slightly into the grass. Every movement felt heavy, deliberate. I made sure the gate didn't creak when I finally turned away. They didn't notice me leave. I walked down the driveway and into my car, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. I sat there for a long time before turning the key. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, a single thought kept repeating in my mind, calm and steady. They think they know what comes next. They're wrong. Because what they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that my life wasn't as empty as they assumed. And the silence they mistook for weakness was about to become very loud. I drove home on autopilot. The roads were familiar, but everything else felt distant, like I was watching my own life through fogged glass. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked the same as always. Quiet. Patient. They said it was wasted on me. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old books. My husband's photo still sat on the side table, exactly where it had been for years. I touched the frame just for a second. "I heard them," I whispered. "All of it." That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea, staring at papers I hadn't looked at in a long time. Folders. Envelopes. Documents my husband had insisted we organize together during his last year. "You'll thank me later," he'd said back then, trying to smile through the pain. At the time I thought he meant the practicality of it. Now I understood something deeper. My son thought I had nothing. But he was wrong. I had savings he didn't know about. I had legal arrangements he had never seen. And I had one letter, sealed, signed and very clear, that my husband told me to open only when the time felt right. I found it in the back of the drawer. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside wasn't just a letter. It was a plan. Not revenge. Not cruelty. Protection. For me. My husband had known. Maybe not the exact words, not the exact moment, But he had known how the world treats women once they grow quiet and old. And he had made sure I wouldn't be helpless. The next morning I made my first call. Then another. And another. I booked appointments. Asked questions. I stopped assuming people would take care of me just because we shared blood. When my son called later that week, I let it go to voicemail. For the first time I wasn't available. For the first time I wasn't predictable. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the hurt and the years of silence, something unfamiliar began to rise. Strength. Not loud. Not angry. Just unmovable. The first appointment was with a lawyer. Not the one my son once recommended. Not the family-friendly guy who sent Christmas cards. This one didn't smile much. He listened. I sat across from him, my hands folded neatly in my lap. And for the first 10 minutes I said nothing. I just let the silence stretch until he finally spoke. Tell me what's really going on. So I did. Not just about the backyard. Not just about the words. But about the years. How slowly I'd been pushed to the edge of my own life. How every decision started with, what would be easier for them? How I'd been shrinking myself so long that people forgot I still took up space. When I finished, he didn't look shocked. He nodded. I see this a lot, he said. Adult children assume ownership before anything is actually theirs. Ownership. That word again. I told him about the house. About the pressure. About the way conversations always seem to circle back to downsizing or assisted living or moving closer to them, which somehow always meant farther from myself. And your assets? He asked. I slid the folder across the desk. He raised his eyebrows. Well, he said slowly, this changes things. For the first time since that afternoon in the backyard, I felt it. Leverage. Not power over them. Power for myself. Over the next weeks, my calendar filled up. Bank appointments. Financial planners. A medical evaluation, my idea, not theirs. I wanted everything documented. Clear. Undeniable. Healthy. Capable. Independent. Meanwhile, my son called more often. Hey Mom, you've been hard to reach. Kept my voice calm. Pleasant. Oh, I've just been busy. Busy. Another word he wasn't used to hearing from me. He started stopping by without calling. Once I wasn't home. Another time I told him I had plans. Plans. He looked confused. Concern crept into his voice. Everything okay? Smiled. Never better. What I didn't say was that I had finally stopped waiting for permission to live. Then came the invitation. Family dinner. His house. Sunday evening. It'd be good for all of us, he said. I knew what it was. Temperature check. A reset attempt. They wanted to see if I was still the same woman who stood quietly behind fences and swallowed pain. I agreed to go. But not the way they expected. That Sunday I dressed carefully. Not flashy. Not fragile. Just sure of myself. When I walked into that backyard again, conversations stopped for half a second too long. My daughter-in-law smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Something had shifted. They felt it too. And as we sat down at that same patio table, the place where they'd spoken about my life like it was already over, I realized something important. This wasn't the beginning of my ending. This was the moment they realized. I wasn't leaving quietly. Dinner started politely. Too politely. Plates were passed around. Small talk floated through the air like it mattered. The kids ran in and out of the yard, laughing, completely unaware of the tension sitting at the table with us. My son kept glancing at me. Not openly. Carefully. Like he was trying to figure out if I was still safe. So, my daughter-in-law said, cutting into her food. How have you been feeling lately? Feeling. That was new. I've been good, I said. Really good, actually. He paused. Just for a second. That's nice, she replied. My son nodded quickly. Yeah, you seem energetic. Smiled. I am. Silence followed. They waited. For me to complain. For me to talk about aches and loneliness. For me to open the door they were used to walking through. Instead I asked, how's work been? They exchanged a look. It wasn't relief. It was disappointment. Halfway through dinner, my daughter-in-law leaned back in her chair. "You know," she said casually, "we've been talking about the future." Course they had. "The kids are growing fast," she continued. "And things change. We just want to make sure everyone's taken care of." Taken care of. I set my fork down. "I agree," I said. "That's important." My son leaned forward. "We were thinking maybe it's time to have some real conversations." I nodded slowly. "I've already started." That did it. My daughter-in-law frowned. "Started what?" "Planning," I said. "Organizing. Making sure everything is clear." My son laughed nervously. "Clear how?" I met his eyes. "Legally clear." The word hung in the air like smoke. The kids' laughter felt suddenly too loud, too far away. "You hired a lawyer?" my daughter-in-law asked, her voice sharper now. "Yes." My son's smile vanished. "Why would you need to do that?" I didn't raise my voice. "Because I should have done it years ago." Neither of them spoke. I could see it now. Fear slipping through the cracks of control. "What about the house?" my son asked carefully. "You know, eventually." "Eventually," I repeated. "It will go exactly where it's supposed to." My daughter-in-law crossed her arms. "Which is?" I took a slow breath. "That's already decided." Her eyes widened just a little. Dinner ended early. No arguments, no yelling. Just a polite goodbye that felt nothing like family. As I walked back to my car, my son followed me. "Mom," he said quietly, "you don't have to shut us out." I turned to him. "I'm not shutting you out," I said. "I'm finally letting myself in." He didn't know what to say. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't in control of the conversation. The next week was quiet. Too quiet. No calls. No surprise visits. No just checking in messages. I knew what that meant. They were regrouping. People don't give up control easily, especially when they never thought they'd lose it. And I had taken something from them without raising my voice or making a scene. Certainty. On Thursday morning, my son finally called. His tone was different this time. Softer. Careful. "Mom, we should talk." I agreed to meet him for coffee. Public places have a way of keeping people honest. He arrived early. That alone told me how anxious he was. "You scared us," he said after we sat down. "Good," I replied. He blinked. "Mom." "No," I said gently. "Let me finish." I leaned forward, keeping my voice low. "You talked about my life like it was already over. About my home like it belonged to you." "I heard you." His face drained of color. You heard that?" "Yes." Silence crashed between us. "I didn't mean it like that," he said quickly. "We were just talking. People say things." "I know," I replied. "That's why it mattered." He rubbed his hands together. "She didn't mean it either." I studied him for a long moment. "Then why didn't you stop her?" He didn't answer. That was answer enough. After coffee, the pressure started. My daughter-in-law sent articles about senior living. My son mentioned estate taxes. Someone suggested power of attorney. Just in case. Just in case. I declined every offer politely. Then came the visit. They showed up together, unannounced. My daughter-in-law walked through my house like she was already imagining changes. "This room could be converted," she said. "You wouldn't need all this space." I looked at her. "You're right," I said. "I won't." She smiled until I added, "Because I won't be living here forever." Both of them froze. "What does that mean?" my son asked. "It means," I said calmly, "that I've made other arrangements." That night, I opened the letter again. The one my husband had written. And for the first time, I read it not as a widow, but as a woman who finally understood her worth. I didn't tell them everything. Not yet. Some truths aren't meant to be handed over gently. They're meant to arrive on their own. Slow, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. The letter from my husband sat open on my nightstand that night. I read it again, taking my time this time, letting every word settle where it was meant to. He had known. Not the details. Not the exact faces or phrases. But the pattern. The way people start to see you as a burden instead of a person. The way love quietly turns into expectation. If they ever make you feel small, he'd written, remember this. Nothing we built belongs to anyone but you. I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I made a decision I'd been putting off for years. I booked a flight. Not to visit family. Not to attend an obligation. Just to go. When my son found out, his reaction wasn't concern. It was panic. A flight. Alone? He asked over the phone. Mom, that's not really safe, finished, or convenient. He hesitated. I just think it's a lot for you. For me, I said. Or for you. The line went quiet. While I was away, the house stayed empty. And something interesting happened in that emptiness. They couldn't check on me. They couldn't monitor me. They couldn't manage me. I stopped being part of their routine. When I came back, there was a message waiting. We need to talk. All of us. Smiled. Because I finally understood something they didn't. This wasn't about my age. It was about access. And access was something I was no longer giving away for free. We met at my house. That was my condition. If they wanted a conversation, it would happen on my ground, under my roof, surrounded by the life they seemed so eager to rearrange. They arrived together again. Coordinated. Prepared. My daughter-in-law carried a folder. Color-coded. Tabs sticking out like quiet warnings. My son kept glancing at it, then at me. She didn't waste time. We've been thinking, she began, settling into the chair across from me, about what's best for everyone. Everyone. I poured myself tea and sat down slowly. That sounds serious, I said. She slid the folder toward me. This outlines some options. Assisted living communities. Legal safeguards. Ways to make transitions easier. Transitions. My son cleared his throat. It's not about taking anything from you, Mom. It's about making sure things don't get complicated later. I opened the folder. Glossy photos. Smiling seniors. Carefully chosen words. Nothing about dignity. Nothing about choice. Closed it. You've done a lot of work, I said. Now let me show you mine. I stood and walked to the cabinet. When I returned, I placed my own folder on the table. No colors. No tabs. Just paper. They watched as I opened it. This, I said, is my medical evaluation. I'm healthy. Cognitively sound. Fully independent. My daughter-in-law stiffened. This, I continued, is my financial plan. My assets are protected. Managed. Accounted for. My son swallowed hard. And this, I said, holding up the final document, is my updated will. Silence. You changed it, he asked. Yes. To include us. My daughter-in-law said quickly. I met her eyes. No. The room felt smaller suddenly. What do you mean, no? She asked. I mean, I said calmly, you're not entitled to anything I built. My son stood up. Mom, you're upset. Let's not do anything drastic. I shook my head. This isn't emotion. This is clarity. They had come expecting weakness. They were leaving with fear. And I hadn't even revealed the full truth yet. They didn't leave right away. My son paced the living room like he used to when he was a teenager. Back when problems could still be fixed by waiting them out. My daughter-in-law sat stiffly on the couch, her hands clenched around that useless folder. This isn't fair, she finally said. I looked at her. What isn't? All of it, she replied. We're family. You're acting like we're strangers. I took a slow breath. Strangers don't usually discuss when someone should stop existing. My son stopped pacing. That was taken out of context, he said quickly. No, I said. It was said when you thought I couldn't hear you. Silence settled again. Then came the shift. The guilt. My son's voice softened. Mom, after Dad died, it was just you and me. I know I haven't always been there the way I should have been, but that doesn't mean we don't care. He nodded. I believe you care. I just don't believe you respect me. That landed harder than anger ever could. My daughter-in-law stood. So what now? You cut us out and disappear. I smiled slightly. No. I live. He scoffed. And we're just supposed to accept that. Yes. They left angry. Not loud. Not explosive. Angry in the way people get when they realize manipulation won't work anymore. That night my phone buzzed. A message from my son. I didn't think it would go this far. Type back slowly. Neither did I. And for the first time he understood something important. I wasn't bluffing. The fallout didn't come all at once. Came in waves. First the silence returned. But this time it wasn't strategic. It was confused. Directionless. The kind of quiet that happens when people don't know which move to make next. Then the messages started. Not from my son. From relatives. An aunt I hadn't spoken to in years. A cousin who suddenly just wanted to check in. Even an old family friend who awkwardly asked if everything was okay between me and the kids. The story was spreading. But not the real one. I was being painted as difficult. Stubborn. Not thinking clearly. The familiar language people use when an older woman stops agreeing. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. Because I had finally learned something important. People who want control don't care about the truth. Only access. One afternoon my son showed up alone. No warning. No backup. He looked tired. Older. Can I come in? He asked. I stepped aside. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the same spot where I'd once stayed up all night helping him study for exams. I didn't realize how serious you were, he admitted quietly. I told you, I said. I've never been clearer. He nodded. She's scared. I know. She thinks you're doing this to punish us. I looked at him then really looked. I'm not doing this to anyone, I said. I'm doing it for myself. He rubbed his face. I don't know how to fix this. I softened, not weakened, just honest. You don't fix it by taking, I said. You fix it by respecting boundaries you should have honored years ago. He sat there for a long time. Then he asked the question he'd been avoiding. What did Dad leave you? I smiled gently. Peace, I said. And a reminder that my life didn't end when his did. He left quietly. And this time I knew, really knew, that whatever came next, I would be ready. A week passed. Then another. No calls. No messages. No relatives checking in anymore. The noise had died down. That's when I knew something important had happened. They had stopped trying to control the story. Because they were starting to understand they couldn't control me either. One morning I walked through my house slowly, noticing things I had ignored for years. The way the sunlight hit the wall near the stairs. The small crack in the window frame my husband always meant to fix. The quiet. It didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt earned. I sat down at the desk and opened the last envelope in my husband's folder, the one I had been saving. Inside was a simple note, written in his familiar handwriting. You don't owe anyone your ending. Live it on your terms. That afternoon I made the final decision. I put the house on the market. Not because they wanted it. 'Cause I was ready for something new. When my son found out, he didn't argue. He didn't push. He just called and said, I hope you're happy, Mom. And for the first time in a long time I didn't hesitate. I am, I said. Months later I moved to a place I chose. A place with mornings that felt open and nights that felt calm. I made friends who knew me not as someone's mother, not as someone's responsibility, but as myself. My son visits now. So do the grandchildren. But they don't manage me anymore. They don't plan my future. They don't speak for me. I walk beside them, not behind. And sometimes when I think back to that afternoon in the backyard, the words I wasn't meant to hear, I realize something strange. If I hadn't heard them, I might still be standing quietly at the fence, believing my life was already over. But it wasn't. It was just beginning.